Sahana Vavatu Sahanao Bunaktu Sahaviryang Karavavahai Tejasvina Vadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay, last week Krishna has left a smile because the teaching is about to begin. He's seen this show over and over again as the Lord. In all cycles of creation, there was always a jiva who asked the same question, who was surrounded by people and circumstances, and who was confused, who was operated by biases and prejudices and hurt, and then started to look for the solution. And when you are in that place, you're vulnerable, you're open, you are ready to listen. Until then, not really. It's okay to listen, but not really. And every person will go through this journey. Eventually, everyone always gets there. Although you cannot quite say that the entire universe of jivas gets there, otherwise we would have no jivas left. In that case, there would be no creation. Sometimes we ask, well, if every jiva gets enlightened and the entire universe is just there to facilitate or be a platform for the jivas to work out their stuff, then what's going to happen to the universe? Is it going to go out of existence? Well, no, because there are infinite jivas. So on one hand, everyone gets there, but on the other hand, the entire universe is populated by jivas. And don't think you're just a jiva as a human being. We're also speaking of plants. That cactus that you go ouch on, that's a jiva. It just got a different body, according to the Vedas. It got a body that makes others go ouch. That's the body that it got. There are other jivas like dogs. And dogs, for instance, not all get owned by a caring owner. Some of them get born in a tribe of doggies, and they have to fight or compete with other dogs. And sometimes, if you're in one of those tribes of doggies, you get hurt. Now, according to the Vedas, this is according to your past causes. You don't remember why you are wearing a dog's body or in a gang of dogs, but you are definitely in danger. Whereas a puppy in a little kettle or a kennel in a store with big bright eyes, and you walk by and you say, oh, that's such a cute dog, and the dog is wagging the tail, love at first sight, and you say, I must have this little companion. And you know it's gonna happen. The dog looks at you, you look at the dog. It's almost like both of you are anticipating having each other. And it's almost something inside you, warm. You know, you snuggle up in that comfort knowing this fella's gonna be with me for a long time. And as you bring them home, you start to train them and tell them no and yes and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And the dog has a very good life. And one of those dogs was you. In some life or the other. I'm not talking about other people. I'm talking about you and I now. And you're like, oh, I'm taken care of so well by this owner. And so you try to be a good dog. And then you end up exhausting all your, according to the Vedas, the karma pala, you exhaust as an animal. And so next life you get reborn as Amita or Silma or Claudia. And then you put a smile on your face and you say, I'm not doing that again. I mean, it was a good thing to be owned, but I didn't have many options. And those options are now given to me in this life. And so Krishna says to you, now that you have gotten an option to work out your unworked out stuff, let me introduce you to who you really are. And so Krishna begins in chapter 2, verse 11. The official teaching starts. He says, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Ashocyan Anusha Ashocyan Anvashochastvam Prajnavadamscha Bhashase Gatasun Agatasumscha Nanushocanti Panditaha. As you are born in this life and with good karma in your account, that means you do meet a teacher, you are interested in this knowledge. Not everyone is interested in this knowledge, and you have taken care of your mind decently enough, and you have recognized the limitations of life, whether an animal, whether a plant, or even a human being. It's still limitation, still mortal, still you can only do so much. Eventually, you say to the teacher, right, how do I work my stuff out, right? And I'm grieving for myself. I'm grieving for my family. My family are dying, my friends are dying, my skills are dying, my talents are dying. Once I was a young, very, kind of sharp individual, and now, right, it's all catching up on me. And right, it's my turn, right? It's just like everyone else I've been seeing who's got gray hair when I was like 20. Now I'm getting gray hair. So I'm grieving after all of this. Now, in Arjuna's case, he's grieving after not only that, but also grieving about a very real situation in the real world. And so Krishna says to him, do not grieve. You grieve for those who are not to be grieved for. Okay. He continues, and yet you speak words of wisdom. So on one hand, the wise people do not grieve for those who are not to be grieved for. We have to find out who those are who are not to be grieved for. And yet, Arjuna, you speak words of wisdom. In other words, if you look at the prior verses, Arjuna was stating his justifications. I'm going to damage the society. This is not good to kill my guru, Bhishma and Drona, or to kill my dear family right on the other side. It is going to cause a conflict in society where we're going to have widows and fatherless children. So Arjun was exercising rationale and intelligence, and any normal person that we consider normal would empathize with that, right? Sympathize with that. But Krishna says, yet you speak words of wisdom, but you grieve for those who are not to be grieved for. Wise do not grieve for those who are gone and not yet gone. Now, this is a huge statement because you can take this in different ways, but Krishna breaks this down. If we break this down into two parts, he says, Panditaha na anushocanti, and then ashochayan anvashochastvam. So he first says, wise people, in this case, the word wise means an individual who knows who they are. They are ascertained their nature, and there's nothing more to attain. They have attained the highest. So those ones, the wise people, do not grieve for those who are not to be grieved for, which is very surprising because you would imagine that Krishna would have, right, emotional intelligence and therefore empathize with Arjun. And he says, okay, so that kind of makes sense. They are not to be grieved. I do not grieve for those who are not to be grieved for. So maybe that way I'll say, of course, there are people who have done a lot of damage to society and have done that on and on and on for years and years and years. And I just have to sort of recognize, take a little bit of some time to say, no, those types are not to be grieved for because they really need to, right, go through a certain treatment process, right? Whether it's jail, whether it's, right, being put in a certain institution or whatever it is, there's no need to grieve for them. So maybe you say that. But then there's another confusing statement he makes. He says, the wise person does not grieve for those who are not yet gone and gone. So what does this mean? If you look at this at face value, like that, just literal understanding, this is how most will read the book. They will say, okay, so therefore they do not grieve for anyone. Therefore now you go to the funeral and you're like completely stoic. Atomic explosion. $1 million. How do you feel about that? I don't grieve for anyone. Nothing, right? Does that sound human to you? Does that look human? Or that just looks weird? In other words, if a true wise person, if you took the statement literally and we imagine that a wise person is this completely stoic, emotionless, no tear, nothing, that would just be a weird person. No one would relate to them because that is not how the mind works. The mind is designed, a healthy human heart is designed to respond to a situation when something is close to you. That's just how it is. Therefore, we have to rule this out. We cannot expect a wise person to never shed a tear, that when someone dies, they're completely stoic, all in the name of, this is only just oneness here. There's nothing to cry for. You know, the tear is Brahman, the act of crying is Brahman, the crier is Brahman, the object towards which I'm crying is Brahman, right? So what is there to do? So that's not a healthy human heart. That is the first important teaching, and I will keep reminding this because there's a tendency to look at the Gita in a literal sense, and then the person actually becomes disoriented and moves away from reality rather than being with reality. So what Krishna here is talking about is how a wise person looks at life, how they look at situations, how they look at disappointment, how they look at themselves, how they look at the world, how they look at the cause of the universe. In other words, the three pillars. How do I look at the jiva? How do I look at the jagat, the universe? And how do I look at the cause of the universe, Ishvaraha? And thereby, by knowing something about the three pillars, jiva, jagat, and Ishvara, it makes the wise person respond differently, though they still are with the situation that the unwise person has not yet understood. And so one more important thing before we move forward. There's a tendency now, when you hear the word wise person, what does the mind, any mind, do if it's not careful? Wise person. What does it now do? It creates a opposite, right? It creates wise, immediately goes black or white, unwise. And then it starts to look at people and starts to judge. He's wise. She's unwise. Yeah, that's wise. See what happens here? So now you have again distanced yourself away from reality when Krishna wants you to be with reality. Furthermore, if you take the word wise, even that has categories or nuances. Or unwise. Let's take unwise. Let's take, for example, Duryodhana unwise. Because according to Krishna, Arjuna is unwise. Understand? This is what the verse says. He says, you speak like a wise person, and yet you are grieving for those who are not to be grieved for. Therefore, you're not wise. Arjuna, you are unwise. Or Arjunena, right? Female. So that means Arjuna is unwise. But Duryodhana is also unwise. So what's the difference? If Duryodhana is unwise and Arjuna is unwise, then what's the difference between Arjuna and Duryodhana, knowing they're both unwise? Would someone like to give this a shot? Think. Silma?
Good morning, Andre. This is Vaidu. Maybe it's the degree of wiseness, unwiseness, or
excellent. Okay, Vyudu. Vyudu, is that the right pronunciation? Vyudu? V-Y-D-U.
Vaidu.
Vaidu. Okay, thank you. Okay, so degree of wiseness. Anything else you want to say? We got hand up with Silma. Nice palm. She's blessing us.
Thank you. Well, I think it's also dharma, adharma, right? they can be unwise, but in terms of dharma, there's no like black and white, but there's no clarity as well.
Excellent, excellent. So both are correct. So it's true that one of them, more important, one of them is seeking the truth, though they're unwise, and the other is unwise, but they're not seeking the truth. See this? So the reason I'm bringing this forward is we need to keep reminding ourselves. I know, and I've seen this with teachers, with students, it's all the same. There's a tendency to create black or white. You're either like this or like that, full stop, next. This is unfair for you. This is not teaching or keeping with the Bhagavad Gita vision. And thus, we need to keep on being reminded about the nuances of reality. Okay, good. So the difference is clearly Arjuna is seeking to become wise. Now, not only that, but there are not all Arjuna unwise pursue the truth. There is Arjuna unwise who pursues the truth, and there is also Arjuna at the same level of Arjuna who does not pursue the truth. That's also possible. Who turns this into a philosophy. I want to learn about the Gita so I can talk about it in, to my, Shat Darshana, the 6 schools of Indian philosophy. So I can talk it to my university students. I went when I did a course at Chinmaya, we were doing a Brahma Sutra, and there were all Indians, and there were only three Caucasians, and I was one of them. And one of them I befriended. He was a professor from the United States. And I asked him, why are you here? And the answer that I got, I was very surprised because it's not in my way to think like that. But his answer was, I am a university professor, and I came here to learn about the Indian philosophy so that I can, compare it and teach it as an academic topic to my students. And I thought, I didn't know that's possible. I didn't know you can turn Vedanta into an academic study. This is supposed to transform your life, not to kind of another certificate. And then I kind of turn around and I say, let me teach you what I heard back there. It's supposed to directly impact you. And then I started to speak about things like the causal body, which we will talk about. That's why we have the chart behind us. And I said, it's, the storehouse of your samskaras. And he says, no, there's no, we don't use the language of storehouse in Vedanta. Wait a minute. That's not how teaching is very dynamic. Okay, you cannot sort of restrict. As long as you explain the words, you can say it. But if you just say it and then you say, no, we don't do that, we do that, that's again black or white thinking. So you can use words like storehouse or vasanas or samskaras as long as you explain what they mean in the first place. Otherwise, for the person just to say something and then to move forward, it leaves the student wondering, and then they start to fantasize what that idea means. So the point is, there are different versions of unwise. Now, Krishna in verse 12 is going to explain who is a wise person. Remember, here a wise person is not someone who is relatively wise. That means they are well educated, they are emotionally intelligent, they have, great finances going for them. A wise person here is the one with moksha. In other words, they've understood and there's nothing more to understand because all that is here is one without a second. So he's going to explain what's going on inside a wise person's mind that makes them, quote, wise, and why doesn't he or she grieve? And what does it mean not to grieve? So this will be in verse 12. Natvevaham jatu nasam, natvam ne me janadipaha, nachaiva nabhavishyamaha, sarve vayam atav param. And Krishna says, there was never a time that I did not exist. Now, when Krishna says this, is he talking about his physical body? No, that would violate the laws of physics. The physical body will deteriorate and die. Is Krishna talking about some thoughts, like he's maintaining some thought constantly in his mind, and in reference to that, he's saying that thought has never died? No, because how long can you keep a thought in your mind? Yeah, I know what you're going to say, because it's the same for everyone. Not longer than even 5 seconds is very hard, okay? So mind is mind. Krishna's mind, ordinary person's mind, Bhishma's mind, Vidur's mind, Vyasa's mind, Rishi's mind. Mind is mind. Mind will not stay stable for more than 5 seconds. So it cannot be referring to that. So he says there was never a time that, so that I has to be referring to something else, right? I did not exist, neither you nor these kings, nor will any of us cease to exist. This is a huge verse. In fact, you can do an entire Gita just in this verse alone. So, see, what is Arjuna's problem? Because Arjuna doesn't want to engage with life for one reason. He's going to, in this story, going to decimate. He's going to kill. He's going to commit what he calls sin. And what does this imply about Arjuna's perception towards living beings? I do not want to, even though they've committed a dharma, I do not want to kill them. What does this imply about Arjuna? What do I not want to kill? Because they are people close to me. He or she on the other side is close to me. Therefore, I do not want to injure him or her. That's genuine expression. This is how we all think. But why do we think like this? Because for Arjuna, where is his I placed? What is his definition of I am? In his body and mind. And thus, he projects that notion onto everybody else. You are as good as your body and mind. If you die, I have lost you forever. If I die, I am gone forever. Or maybe not, maybe I'll travel. But my idea or conclusion about you or I is so firmly fixed that it's as good as the body-mind that I cannot kill you, the body-mind. And thus, I'm not going to. So Arjuna's vision is deeply entangled in the notion that, or the conclusion that, I is as good as the bones and the flesh and the brain and the mucus and the, and the stomach and the lungs and the heart and the neurons and the cells and the nails and the hair and the knuckles and the toes and the feet and the legs and the thighs and the muscles and the muscle fascia and the mitochondria, ribosomes, that much you are. If your ribosome is gone, if your mitochondria, the powerhouse factory is gone, right, then you can't do that because that is who you are. And I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid of that going out of existence. So Krishna then has to show the true nature of I, Atma. When we say the word Atma, it just means I am. Okay, another word for it is self, but it's just I am. So when you say I am, when you start your sentences with I, you're referring to who you are. Now, depending on your understanding of I am, will depend on your relationship with this body that you're wearing right now and every other body that you see. So Krishna has to be very precise in explaining what is the nature of Atma. And he starts by saying, this Atma, there was never a time when I, Atma, did not exist. And there will never be a time when I, Atma, will cease to exist. That means there was never a beginning to me. There was never a time, once upon a time, where I was not. And then suddenly something happened, something arose. And then suddenly I came into being for the first time. And there will never be a time in the future, how many years, infinite amount of years in the future, when that same I that's true now will come to an end. That will never happen. Now, The problem so far is if I stop here, then what's the listener going to conclude? Well, of course, he's Krishna. He's an avatar. Of course, his eye was never born, nor will it ever cease. But I'm just a jiva. I'm not Krishna. So Krishna immediately cancels this assumption, and he says, and there was never a time when you did not exist, and that you will cease to be. Again, can Krishna be here referring to your body? No. Can he be referring to your opinion about you, which doesn't last more than one day? Today I'm fat and ugly and bald and stupid. Tomorrow I'm just rocking it. Your opinions about I change every single day. In fact, every single 1 hour. When you're walking with your friend in the public and you go to a public place and your friend, you're just having a great time. How is your eye in that moment? It feels great, doesn't it? It's like, yeah, welcome, let's go. Yeah, you're confident, big eye, inflated eye. And then your friend walks into the bar and you walk in with them and your eye is so inflated. It feels great. You want to stay there. And your friend goes, oh, sorry, I got to leave you here and I'm going to go and get something done. And they leave the door and they haven't introduced you to anyone. How is your eye now? What happened to that eye? You know very well what we're talking about. And that eye, now you're thinking, instead of meeting, oh no, I really want to go back to that other eye. So now you're chasing different atmas because you're putting the definition of atma into an experience. And so the experience then becomes, so the way to life is to inflate my atma. How? By associating with the right people, by having the right job, the right occupation, the right status, the right clothing, the right body. The whole life becomes about changing the mind because your atma is put inside the mind and the features of the body, and thus one becomes a complex human being because all the complexes now become atmas, when in truth, atma has no connection whatsoever to the thoughts or to the conditions of the mind. So he says, thus, your atma in truth, that I, who you know yourself to be, who always was the most familiar being to yourself, which is none other than yourself. Who else was more familiar to you than you, to yourself? That being is free of limitations of time. Because he says there was never a time when I was not, he's referring to you. And there was never a time when I will cease to exist. And there's only one I here. So he cannot be referring to something other than you. So, see, this is very interesting. When we think of time, why do you experience time? Because we all agree, right now, I am just being in this moment, but there is a sense of time. Watch this. Notice how time is going by. Feel that impatience in you. Come on, Andrew, get to the point. No. Feel time. Okay. If I took your memory away, your chittam, you would have no sense of time from your standpoint. The only reason why you have a sense of time, why time is true from your standpoint, is because you have a memory. And memory connects every moment to the next, and it produces an illusionary sense of time. And then you say, oh, time is going by. If you didn't have memory, all you would ever experience is now, 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 now. There will be no sense of now compared to 5 minutes ago. It will only be now. So you start to think, wow, so this is how much we're fooled by the mere capacity and the mere attunement that our brain is operating at. I'm giving a memory, and by that alone, there's time. And then I study time based on merely having a memory. There's a guy on YouTube called 7-Second Memory Man. Have you seen this? 7-Second Memory Man. It's an amazing documentary because he was having a disease that somehow penetrated his brain and started to eat the hippocampus, which is responsible for short-term memory, or the hypothalamus, one of those. And what happened is he was walking outside, I think it was London or somewhere, and suddenly he couldn't remember where his home was. So he had to call the police to help him come back home. And what happened is this disease started to eat up the entire hippocampus before it was too late, because he went to get MRI, brain scan, and they said it's too late. You have permanent memory loss. And what happened was he still had long-term memory. He could still remember his wife, his recognized things in the house, but he could not have a sense of right now. He had no sense of the fact. He was saying, I want to be present. I want to be present. I want to be, and all he was doing was writing in his book, now I'm present. No, now this is the true present moment. Now is the true present moment. So he was constantly trying to put himself into the present moment, because for him, from his standpoint, there was no time. And he wanted some solid base, right, to rest on. But for you and I, it's like, this is normal. This sense of time, this is normal. But you know what? It's only as normal because you have a memory. That's how relative it really is here. You think just because you have a memory and there's a sense of time, that's normal. But truly, you take away memory and there's no time, now that's the new normal. In fact, that's the real normal. So you say, wow. So, and sometimes people say, when I have near-death experiences, and they come back, which I like to read this a lot before I go to sleep, because they report so many good, interesting things, what they heard on the other side. One of them said, what I heard, I'm an atheist, he said. I never believed in God, or I was never into that. But on the other side, there was some person, some being who told me that the way to live your life is just do the best that you can and do not worry about the consequences too much, because you don't really control them. Now, this is exactly what chapter 3 of the Gita is saying. Now, I find it very interesting. That's why I like to listen to these stories, because they have no connection to the Gita. I like to listen, what does the other side have to say? And he says, everyone's just doing the best they can, and everyone will eventually get there. It's like, wow, this is a perfect reflection of the entire Bhagavad Gita. And he says, I felt so peaceful and warm, being like blanketed by a warm quilt, right? Like a little pillow. I was so comfortable. And I saw colors that do not exist in this world. I saw new colors that I cannot see right now. Imagine that. There are actually colors that our eyes or our brain cannot and has never seen here. Can you see? It's hard to even imagine that, isn't it? To imagine a new color. It's almost like you can only imagine something based on seeing it. So the point is, there is so many more things that you do not know about, because your brain is localized to a certain frequency and you cannot see past that frequency. So now what Krishna wants to do is wants to snap you out of this whole paradigm where what I see is all that is to it. No, there's so much more. And so he starts out with a methodology. And he says, reality can be divided into, for the sake of conversation, later on we'll combine them again, but divided into two principles. There is what's called your intrinsic nature and what's called your incidental nature. So your nature of who you are, to know who you are, you have to start with an inquiry. And he says first, incidental nature is that which is not essential to something else. It is not essential to the nature of something else. For example, before I give you an example. So the incidental nature, so change that. Incidental nature is not essential for the nature of something else. An intrinsic nature is essential and non-negatable. So for example, take a whiteboard. If I take a pen here and I start to draw, what is here incidental? What is here non-essential? Right? The pen, the drawing. What is essential? The whiteboard. So in other words, without the whiteboard, I could not draw. That means I need a background for me to draw upon. So this means the intrinsic nature in this example is the whiteboard. The whiteboard is needed for incidental nature to take place upon. So that means without the intrinsic nature, incidental nature, that which is not essential to something else, could never take place. Whereas the intrinsic nature, it is essential and it's unchanging. It is absolutely essential. Without the intrinsic nature of who you are, there could be no experience. That's what this represents, experience. Today, I feel like a big smiley face. Then I feel like, right, sad. All of this, the story of your life is being written upon your intrinsic nature, the intrinsic nature of who you are. So, in Sanskrit, we call this incidental nature tatastha lakshana. And what it means is anything that changes or modifies or is in flux or is variable, just like this, it changes, it's in flux, right? I can change color here, okay? And mess up the whole thing. That's what's happening. But am I really messing up the whiteboard? No, because if the whiteboard was messed up, then you could never, right, write another color. You could never have another experience upon you if you were stuck with a prior experience. For example, is anyone constantly happy? No. What does that mean about your intrinsic nature? It is free of happiness. Is everyone constantly feeling a sense of love towards all beings? No, you can also have dislike or repulsion. What does that say about your nature, your intrinsic nature? It is free of love. Is everyone constantly entertaining one particular thought in their mind? Like I'm like this, I'm like this, I'm like this. No, what does that mean? Your nature, nothing sticks onto your intrinsic nature. So again, incidental nature is that which can change and it depends upon something else. What does this depend upon? It depends upon the whiteboard. Therefore, incidental nature always depends upon something else. Number one. Number two, it constantly changes and fluctuates. And number three, anything else you want to say about the incidental nature? One, it fluctuates. Two, it depends upon something else. Anything else you want to say? It's okay. These two we can hold. One, it changes. Now, what changes? Does your body change? It's changing constantly. You're losing 900 million cells, I believe, every 3 minutes or so. Hair constantly changing. That little beautiful face that people nowadays put 3 millimeters of makeup on because they don't want to see the change. I've seen this. I can't look at these people. It's like I just get that makeup off. It's fake. Why? Because they know the body is changing. It's degrading. So what do? I fool myself. I deceive myself. I put, right, certain kind of things upon there. I tell you, a true man, he doesn't want to see your makeup. I can tell you that for sure. A man doesn't want to see it. A healthy man actually doesn't want to see your makeup. He actually appreciates your pure face without makeup. But of course, it's not always like that. So, is the body changing every single minute? How about your thoughts? How many thoughts do you have per day? I heard 60,000. every single day. Now you say, well, I don't think 60,000 thoughts. No, 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 no. A thought in Sanskrit is called vritti. A vritti means thought modification. The moment you turn your head and you see a wall, your mind has already shaped into a wall. That's called a thought, a vritti. The moment I look up towards the ceiling, again, another vritti, which is now replicating the ceiling. When I hear a sound, the mind is replicating the sound. So your mind is constantly molding and shaping itself every minute, depending upon what your senses are capturing. That's the job of the mind. That's why it's not possible to keep the mind in a no-mind state. This is the common misconception. Enlightenment means keeping my mind in a constant sense of thoughtlessness. Try that, you will badly fail, because the mind is not supposed to do that. The mind is supposed to think, supposed to contemplate, supposed to work things out, because that is its job. What about your, I know, Silma, what about your sense organs, such as sight? What happened when we were children and our eyes were brilliant? We could see far. Now, as a grown-up, it doesn't see so far. There's some blurriness there. Has your awareness become blurry? No. In the presence of awareness of I, there is a blurry sight. In the presence of I, Atma, there is a far sight, short sight, there is good hearing, poor hearing. In other words, do not mistake the conditions of your senses and attribute them onto your intrinsic nature. The senses are incidental nature because they are changing and they are dependent. The eyes are dependent on an object. The object is dependent upon, right, atoms and so on. The eyes are further dependent upon the mind. If the mind is daydreaming and the eyes are open like this, and I'm daydreaming, Andre, huh? And in front of me, so many things took place. So many words were said. Where was my mind? It was in a different world, which is very interesting. This is how the rishis worked out that there is something called the physical body and the subtle body. That's why we have it here. The physical body is over here, and the subtle body is over here, which is your ability to imagine, the ability to cognize, the ability to emote. So that means you can be in a totally different world, and your senses are fully open and seeing the world, but there is no receiver of that information, because the mind is not there. So what does it say? The object depends upon the sight depends upon the mind, and the mind depends upon your intrinsic nature. You, the observer of that changing mind. Think about this. If the mind is changing 60,000 thoughts, if you were changing right along with the mind, could you recognize those 60,000 thoughts? No, because you would be as good as every change, and therefore there will be no sense of prior. The fact that there is a flux has to mean there must be a non-moving presence. To recognize that the mind is moving implies there is a non-moving presence. To recognize that things are changing in my life, that things are changing in my mind, implies that I must be other than the mind. If I was as good as the mind, then when the mind changes from A to B, I would not be able to tell that the mind has changed from A to B. So for the mind to change, there has to be an unchanging presence. That's called your intrinsic presence to recognize that fact. Therefore, just look at your experience alone. In order to tell or recognize a variable, there has to be an invariable. To say that the earth is rotating, there has to be an unmoving sun. To say that the train is moving, there has to be an unmoving background. To say that the thought that life is going by, life is going by, implies there must be one who is completely here, unmoving. Therefore, two, things make up your nature: the incidental and the intrinsic. Incidental is changing, and it is not essential, because if your thought was essential, then that means when your thought goes, what would happen to you? What would happen to I, the awareful one? You would go right along with it. Does that happen? When a thought goes, do you go right along with a thought? Or you are there to observe the coming of another thought? Yes, indeed. And that thought is there. Me, the observer of that thought, am still there. I survive the changes of the mind to observe them coming and going. Therefore, to see change, I have to survive the change. To see that things are changing in life, I have to survive that which is changing in life. That which survives, call it whatever you want, atma, brahman, this or that, that is your real nature, which we call existence or awareness. Before moving forward, Silma, you have a hand up?
Question about wise men and vasana, because there's a school which said that you have to remove all your vasanas to enjoy the wiseness. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, I've been in several schools, and I'm privileged to be in several schools in Chinmaya and Dayananda school. So I know both languages that go on. Now, in Chinmaya school, and I have total respect for all schools because they have excellent views about life. In Chinmaya school, there was once a teaching which said that in order to come to your truth, you have to remove all impressions, all mental impressions, like all your likes and dislikes. And this brings up a very, it brings up a little bit of a question. Is that really possible? Because when you clean up one vasana, when you open up a can of worms, what happens then? Right? You get more worms popping out everywhere. So when you clean out one vasana, what happens 1 year later? A brand new set of vasanas or impressions comes through, and you will never be able to clean up all vasanas. You can only clean up enough so they don't bother you. For example, very simple metaphor. A house. Can you ever keep your house perfectly clean? Like not a single speck of dust. Okay? No. Do you need to keep it clean? Absolutely. Okay, yes, you do need to keep it clean. Do you have to keep it clean perfectly where there's not one single germ in the house? Not at all. You can have some leaves in the house if you want, some dust, that's no problem. But what happens at a certain turning point when it really starts to now almost like take away your attention from other things? What happens then? That turning point is when it becomes unhealthy. If you don't do something about it, then I try to learn and I try to study, but I cannot help but to start coughing and start to get annoyed by all the things flying in the air. That's when I have to clean up my house. But will I ever clean up my house completely? No. Do I need to? No. Therefore, we need to follow the path of what's called balance, simple balance, not too much, not too little, just enough so that it doesn't bother me and therefore distract me from what's really important in life. So no, the answer directly is you do not have to clean up all your vasanas because it's impossible. Okay, and that's a great relief, isn't it? Because I know the pressure that comes, people thinking, it can't. In fact, a person who says that, I don't think they understand living, what living is really about, right? One can really live in a perfect place and they tell you so easy, no, just clean up all your vasanas. But I want to see them in the real world, in real challenges, in real challenging situations, and tell me then how your so-called vasana cleanup is going to do. It's not possible. Therefore, we have to be realistic. And reality doesn't lie. You know from your own experience, you cannot have a perfect mind. You cannot have perfect composure all the time. You cannot have total tranquility at all times. You cannot have total understanding, feeling the presence of Ishwara in all things at all times, seeing everyone as a perfect divine expression of the oneness. You cannot have that all the time. When it comes to transactional challenges, you will waver. But then you simply return yourself back. That's the work. Okay. Otherwise, this whole one-time work, like one-time cleanup, one-time get it all right, this will never happen. So let's drop this idea of perfection. No one is going to be perfect. I have not seen any teacher who is perfect. This idea has to leave. As long as it stays, what happens? We try to look for perfect people, try to look for perfect personalities in ourselves. And then because we're not happy with ourselves, then we start to look at others and say, no, 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 you got an imperfect personality, therefore out. Therefore, let's work on ourselves and not really be concerned about others, because you don't really have control over other people. Okay. So this intrinsic nature, what is this? What is the nature of? It is the nature of awareness, which enables all thoughts to be known. What makes all your thoughts be known? It is not the thoughts themselves, it is you. Like the one light. Remember that example that I said? Why do you see this hand compared to a thought? This hand is a thought. Why do you see this hand? Look how it's going, coming and going in your mind. Zoom, because of the light. Now another thought comes. It's a different nature, right? Why do you see this thought? Because of the same light. One light illumining all objects in your house. The house here is equated to your mind. So the mind is constantly reshuffling objects, coming and going out the door. New thoughts come out. New thoughts enter your house. That's called your mind. Thoughts leave, but there's only one light. And that light, in the presence of that light, which is you, your intrinsic nature, you come to see all thoughts are coming and going all day long. And that light in your mind is not different from the light in Andre's mind, is not different from the light in Swami's or Swamini's mind. It is one universal light. It's like light. Don't think it's physical light, photons. It is like light, simply illumining all of the changes that are going on in your mind. Thereby, it is the observer of everything that happens in your life, in your mind, in your body, and so on. Okay. Now we say the nature of this Atma is Sat and Chit. So what you say, can you tell me more about Atma? Who am I? Well, it is of the nature of existence, and it is of the nature of awareness. Now, what does this mean? Because it's very vague to say this existence. Now, what I don't mean when I say Sat, Sat means existence. Look at this pen. This pen exists. That's why you're looking at it. This hand exists. That's why you're looking at it. But what did you notice about the pen? Is it still here? No. Is the hand here? No. In other words, the hand is only here when it's here. The pen is only here when it's here. But what can you not negate? You cannot negate existence itself, because pen exists. Now, I break this pen, and then I have scrap exists. I burn the scrap into ash. Ash exists. I break down the ash into atoms. Atoms exist. I break down the atoms into particles. Particles exist. I break down the particles into the smallest quarks. Quarks exist. Now, what Vedanta is going to show you is that this is what science cannot do. Science doesn't know what is the final cause of the universe. But we will see. In Vedanta, we will say it is all knowledge and all power, Ishvara. And then the truth of Ishvara is your truth also. This is what we'll talk about. So, the nature of Atma is existence and awareness. Now, I do not mean an existent object. Because if you say that Atma is an existent object, then it can go away. But what did Krishna say? There was never a time when you did not exist, and there will never a time be when you will cease to exist. So is he talking about an object in a conventional sense that comes and goes, comes and goes? No. So therefore, when we say your nature is existence, what we are talking about is the truth of existence, the reality of the reality because of which time is, not the truth of existence. What I meant to say was, it is talking about the truth of time itself. Time exists. Table exists. Thought exists. Emotion exists. Finger exists. Hand exists. I can get rid of the hand, but what can I not get rid of? Existence itself. So this is very important. We are not speaking of Atma as an existent object. Atma is existence itself, the existence from which everything else arises, the existence from which time arises, the existence from which the universe arises, the existence from which a table arises, from which a thought arises, from which an emotion arises. That is why everything that happens in your life, if there's one truth about it, what is that truth about that thing that happens? It exists. Can you argue that? You can't argue that. That's a universal phenomena in all things, in all thoughts, in all emotions, in bodies. Now, suppose you say, yeah, I don't know what this Atma is. Does that thought exist? You see what's happening here? What does the unwise person get confused? They get confused in the shape of the mind. I do not know Atma. That's a shape. Remember how I said earlier? Shape of the mind, shape of the mind. So now a thought comes and it says, I do not know Atma, and they get preoccupied with the shape of the mind. But what is the teacher saying? Does that thought exist? Yes, that existence itself is who you are. In other words, you are obtaining as that thought. So where does a wise person recognize their nature? In the very existence of a thought. Where does the unwise person get confused? Oh, I'm not feeling well today. And they go for the shape of the mind. Therefore, this is why this knowledge has to be practiced initially, because the mind is so used to going back onto the shape of the mind, shape of the mind, shape of the thought, shape of the emotion, shape of the mind. But the wise person is the one who recognizes, no, it's the thought exists. It doesn't matter what thought it is, because the nature of the mind is duality, is to give you good thoughts, bad thoughts, wonderful thoughts, not so wonderful thoughts. That is the nature of the mind. So let the mind do what it's supposed to do, change and shape, because the incidental nature is always changing. But what is the truth of the incidental nature? What is the truth of every thought? Existence. Therefore, out of you, the existent one, a thought gets formed. Out of you, the existent one, who was never born and will never cease to exist, an emotion, a concern gets born. Where does ignorance take place? When I look at that, oh no. See that? That's the difference between a wise and the unwise person. The wise person recognizes the content of all things is one existence. For example, if you take this, if I'm not going to take this, because you've probably seen the pot example a million times, I'm going to take my creation, a nice bridge. I built this, there was some cool kids, and I decided to build a bridge myself. And I thought I would never want to keep this, but then I realized it's a cool thing. So this is made out of ceramic, yeah? And it was spontaneous, so I built something. And this bridge is pretty. Hopefully it's pretty, because it was my creation. And, you know, it's got function, it's got shape, you can climb up, you can go through, right? On the other side, you can play with it, you can look at it, you can appreciate it. But is there anywhere throughout this bridge where the ceramic is not? No. Do I have to meditate on the ceramic to get to the ceramic? Does the bridge have to go, oh, okay, I'm away from the ceramic, and I have to just wait for that moment of recognition called moksha. I have to wait for that moment to come. Does the bridge have to do that? In reference to the bridge, recognizing its intrinsic nature, what does the bridge have to, quote, do? Nothing. It has to simply own up that what I am seeking, I already am. For a time being, I am given, because of my karma, a shape that the world calls a bridge. And I can appreciate that. Let's do the best that we can, and let's serve the world with a bridge. This is my service to the world. While I'm serving the world with my role as a bridge, I do not ever forget my nature, because when is there ever a time when I am not? Never. Thereby, what the wise person understands is, despite this body and this thought and this life, I let it be. That is what I'm given. Let's make the most of it. But it doesn't displace who and what I am. The one who never began, who will never end. And where do we make again the problem? Where is our confusion? It is where you put your identification. You, in this case, is who? The ceramic. Now, where is ignorance? When the ceramic, who you are, puts the identity into the bridge. And therefore, the bridge is not the cup. And so what does the bridge experience? Smallness. I am jealous. I want to be like the cup. I want to now go like this towards the cup, right? I want to mate with the cup, because so we can make smaller cups, right? Because the nature from the standpoint of this person is as good as the bridge. So all the complexities, all of the confusions and the inadequacies belonging to the bridge now become mamakara, mine, mine, mine. And thus the person ends up living in the name of these limitations, going out there into the world, trying to find something that they already are, because the entire universe already is made out of ceramic, suppose. And they're going out there trying to look for better ceramic forms, when all you have to do is own up that whoever I am as an incidental, I am blessed this body for 80 years. Let's make the most of it. But it doesn't deny or displace my nature, which is ceramic, which the entire universe is made of. More on this next week. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnam Eva Avashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti